Hello everyone. Welcome to this session on personality. This is one of the most important areas of general psychology and frequently appears in entrance exams like your M.Phil entrance exams at IBHAS or NIMHANS and so on and so forth. So I am Dr. Olivia Kakati Sarma, your faculty for general psychology at Conceptual Psychology, and in the next 30 minutes we are going to cover the nature of personality, the concept of self, the biological foundations, culture and gender influences on personality, the major perspectives on personality, theories of personality development, and finally, the personality assessment methods. So by the end of this lecture, you should be able to connect the different schools of thought of psychology to how we understand personality today. So let's begin our journey, starting with the nature of personality. Let us begin with the definition. So personality can be defined as the dynamic but relatively stable and organized and unique set of characteristics possessed by a person that uniquely influences their cognitions, their motivations, as well as their behavior, across various situations in their lifetime. So personality, what is it? It is a dynamic but relatively stable, unique set of characteristics which influence almost every domain of a person's life, So in simpler words, personality is what makes us who we are, So it includes the stable traits as well as the ones that evolve over time, So it influences, this we have already said, it influences thoughts, emotions, as well as your behavior, So now this personality is seen to be very closely linked to the concept of self, which refers to how we perceive ourselves and evaluate ourselves over time, But psychologists distinguish between the concept of real self and ideal self. So this was mainly proposed by Rogers, who came up with this distinction between real self and ideal self. So real self means who we actually are, and ideal self is who we actually wish to become. So a healthy personality is often seen as, the congruence between the real self and the ideal self. When the real self and the ideal self are too far apart, then there are issues in our personality. Next, we have the biological foundations of personality. So moving on, we know that, research shows that genetics play a very strong role in personality development. So we have the evidence from twins studies that shows that, traits like extraversion and neuroticism have a strong element of heritability. Also, the various brain structures like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are implicated in emotional regulation and impulse control. Then if we talk about the neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin influence our personality traits like novelty seeking, while serotonin is linked to mood stability. So there is a biological foundation to almost all parts of our personality. So we can see the influence of genetics on our temperament, then how brain structures influence different parts of our personality traits, then how neurotransmitters are also responsible for particular personality traits. Now, if we talk about an evolutionary perspective, certain personality traits may have more adaptive value. For example, if we talk about cooperation, that enhances your chances as a group for surviving. Okay. Then if we talk about temperament, which is observed in your infancy stages, that lays the groundwork for your later personality later in life. Okay. So when we talk about biological foundations, we talk about both genetics, brain structures, as well as the evolutionary perspectives. Next, we have the work on culture and gender and personality. Okay. So it is essential to remember that personality is not only biological in nature, but it is also shaped by both culture and gender. Okay. So cross-cultural psychology shows that collectivistic societies, like that of India, emphasize traits like harmony and interdependence on each other. Whereas individualistic societies or individualistic cultures emphasize the role of autonomy and independence. Okay, autonomy, independence, and a sense of achievement. Okay, so gender roles also further influence how our personality develops over time. For example, traits like assertiveness and nurturance have been historically divided along the gender lines, though contemporary research stresses, flexibility and overlap amongst these. So basically from this part, we can understand that personality is shaped both by cultural context and by gender roles. So culture emphasizes what kind of, personality traits are more viable and what not. And gender roles sort of determine, what roles are viable. I mean, what personality traits are viable in a particular gender. Next, we have the psychodynamic perspective on personality. Okay. So now as we turn into the major perspectives of personality, the psychodynamic perspective found in the forefront. So this was mainly founded by Sigmund Freud. Okay, Sigmund Freud came up with this first, which was later taken up by the Neo-Freudians. So Sigmund Freud talks about three parts of the personality that, our unconscious drives, your childhood experiences, and defense mechanisms are very important in regulating our personality. And he proposed the three-layer structure of the mind, which consists of the id, ego, and superego. Okay, so id is the instinctual drives that we have. Ego is the reality-oriented mediator between the id and the superego. And superego is our moral conscience. So one frequently asked question in the entrance includes, id works on which principle? It works on the pleasure principle. Then ego works on the reality principle and superego works on the morality principle. Okay. So Freud also emphasized the role of unconscious and defense mechanisms. So Freud said that defense mechanisms like that of repression, denial, and projection are actually, all kinds of defense mechanisms are nothing but unconscious strategies to reduce anxiety. Okay. So while Freud's theories are criticized for being unscientific, they were very revolutionary in terms of drawing attention to the unconscious mind. So Freud's theory emphasizes on the importance of early childhood experiences. Okay. So early childhood experiences are seen to be foundational for personality development later in life, according to Freud's psychodynamic perspective. Okay. Next, we have the work of the Neo-Freudians or the Neo-Freudian approaches to understanding personality. So these are the approaches of personality which developed on the groundwork laid by Freud, and Neo-Freudians either, they developed on Freud's perspective, and either they supported some approaches laid forth by Freud, or their theories grew as reactions to some of the things proposed by Freud. Okay, so number one is your Adler. So Adler talked about the drive for superiority and the concept of inferiority complex. Okay, so Alfred Adler said that we have some kind of, inferiority complexes, and we want to always strive for superiority, and that drives personality development. Okay, next we have the work of Jung, who emphasized on the role of not just your personal unconscious, but he said that we also have a concept of collective unconscious, okay, which is our shared unconscious, or the shared history that we have as a human race that builds up our collective unconscious. He also introduced the concept of archetypes, okay? Anima, animus, shadow, you're all aware of these, right? So these are, again, important concepts that we need to know. Then number 3 is Karen Horney, who highlighted, the role of basic anxiety and the role of interpersonal relationships as being very crucial and central to personality development. Then finally, Erikson's approach is important, who developed the psychosocial, based on Freud's psychosexual stages. He came up with the psychosocial stages of development across the lifespan. So these psychosocial stages have been explained in detail in the developmental psychology part of this series. Okay, so I won't repeat that now. So we see that together these theorists, they broaden the understanding of personality beyond just Freud's sexual instincts. Okay, so that's about the Neo-Freudian approaches. Now coming to the phenomenological and your humanistic approaches. Okay, so the phenomenological approach and the humanistic approach, they sort of focused on what we call subjective experiences, and self-growth. Okay, so humanists, they found the other approaches to personality very reductionist in nature. Okay, so they said that Freud and all these people, they equated man to a animal, only functional according to his or her drives. But the phenomenological and the humanistic approach said that man is more to that. Okay, there is more to man than just their drives and instincts. Okay, so based on this principle, the different humanists came up with different theories. Okay, so when we talk about Carl Rogers, he came up with a self-concept. Okay, and he said, we just talked about the real self and the ideal self, right? So he said that, when there is congruence between the real self and the ideal self, then your personality development occurs the best, and you also need unconditional positive regard, okay, to grow and develop in your life. Okay, next comes Maslow. So Maslow came up with the need hierarchy theory, which culminates in self-actualization. And these theories sort of actually, they emphasize on one's growth and free will. Okay, personal responsibility as well as the potential for growth. So in clinical practice, we see that humanistic principles shape the client-centered therapy. Okay, client-centered therapy approaches were mainly led by the humanistic approaches. Okay. Next, we have the behavioral and socio-cognitive perspective. So these are the approaches led forth by behaviorists like Skinner and Bandura. So they argued that personality is not innate in nature, rather it is learned through conditioning, social learning, and observational learning. Okay, so they said that personality is nothing but behavior which is shaped in the course of our lifetime through learning. So this learning can happen through different mediums like conditioning, both classical and operant, then as well as observational learning. Okay, so Bandura also highlighted the concept of reciprocal determinism, where what is this reciprocal determinism? This is again an important question. Reciprocal determinism means that both behavior, environment, as well as the personal factors, they influence each other to in totality create the personalities that we have. Okay, so the behavior, environment, as well as the personal factors always influence each other. That is the concept of reciprocal determinism. Then Bandura also introduced the concept of self-efficacy, which is the belief in one's ability to succeed. Okay, and that is very important for your behavior. It is a key determinant of our behavioral outcomes. That's about the behavioral and socio-cognitive approaches. Next, we have the trait and type approaches of personality. Okay, so the trait approach to personality, it tries to identify the stable dimensions of our personality. Okay, so Gordon Allport is one of the most important trait theorists. So he distinguished between cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. Okay, that is the distinction given by Allport. Essential to remember. You can go ahead and find, the detailed explanations for these in our detailed general psychology lecture series. Then we have the work of Raymond Cattell, who gave the very famous 16PF test, right? So he identified 16 personality factors based on which he came up with the 16PF personality test. Then we also have the work of Eysenck, Hans Eysenck for that matter, who proposed three major dimensions of personality, the ENP, that is extraversion versus introversion, that is one continuum. Then there is neuroticism versus stability, and P being psychoticism. Okay, that is Eysenck's contribution. Then we have the Big Five, or what we call the ocean model. Okay, so what is this ocean? O is openness, C is conscientiousness. Okay, C is what? Conscientiousness. Then we have, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay, so this remains the most accepted theory till date. And finally, we have the type theories like, how Hippocrates talked about the four humors, or Carl Jung talked about the extrovert introvert dichotomy. Okay, so these are very older approaches, but still influential in applied settings. Like now we have the MBTI, right? Myers-Briggs type indicator. So this laid the foundation stone for these kind of personality tests which came up later. So now that we have understood the major perspectives and theories of personality, let us move on to the other perspectives on personality. Okay, so the other perspectives or the other theories of personality also, they exist beyond these very commonly, famously known, theories that we just talked about. So for example, we have the cognitive developmental approaches, which emphasize how, thinking patterns actually shape our personality. Okay, then what do they say? The thinking patterns influence our personality. Okay, then we have the learning theories, which highlight the role of reinforcement histories. Okay, how reinforcements were done, based on that our personality develops. Okay, then now we have intriguing interest and extensive emphasis on the Indian psychological approaches or on the Indian knowledge systems, right? So we are also supposed to understand the Indian psychological approach to personality, which talks about the Trigunas. Why Triguna? Because there are three guns that this talks about. Okay, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Okay, what are these? These are the three gunas. Okay, it's like a typology which describes the different modes of personality expression. Okay, so these culturally grounded theories show us that personality study is not just limited to Western traditions, but it has very strong roots in our Indian traditions as well. Next, we have a very important topic left, which is on personality assessment. Okay, so when we talk about personality assessment, we mainly talk about two types of tests. One is your objective tests or your projective tests. Okay, so objective tests are the ones which use certain kind of standardized questionnaires. Okay, whereas projective tests like the Rorschach-Inkblot test, then thematic perception test. We talked about McClelland's needs theory, right? So McClelland's, based on that, we have the thematic perception test or the sentence completion test. So, or the draw a person test. They actually aim to uncover the unconscious parts of our personality through the use of some ambiguous stimuli. Okay, so projective tests actually tap onto deeper processes and they try to tap onto our unconscious. Okay, so while projective tests are very structured and based on standardized questionnaires, projective tests actually dig deeper and use ambiguous stimuli to uncover unconscious aspects of our personality. So examples of objective tests include your 16PF, your Neo-PI, then MMPI, whereas projective tests are like Rorschach, TAT, sentence completion, and so on and so forth. So both these methods are very valuable. So because objective tests allow us to provide a certain structure, whereas projective tests allow us a more exploration of the deeper underlying unconscious processes. Okay, so that's about personality assessment. Next, we have the summary, to summarize. So to summarize, we can say that personality is shaped by both the biological factors as well as our environment, and it is interpreted through multiple perspectives. All perspectives, though one might be less popular than the other, are very helpful and essential to understand personality and personality development. So there are multiple processes which we discussed, or the multiple perspectives that we discussed, like the psychodynamic perspective, the humanistic perspective, the behavioral perspective, social cognitive, and trait and type approaches. When we talk about assessment, it ranges from, objective scales to projective techniques, each with its own unique set of strengths and limitations. Okay. So if we talk about the relevance for clinical psychology, we see that in clinical psychology, understanding personality is essential, not just for diagnosis, but for treatment planning and therapeutic interventions as well. Okay. So thank you for listening to this lecture. In your preparation, I encourage you to revise the key theorists, major personality models, and the important assessment tools, as these frequently appear in the entrance exams. So with that, I would like to take your leave. Thank you so much. Be back for other lectures. Thank you.